And so to tell you a little bit about the prize, essentially students like Peter and Corrine use materials from our collection, they draw on historical resources, and then they find a way to integrate that into their own work. And this year, as I mentioned, it's unique in that we have two. I get the real pleasure of actually sitting in the room as the judges sort of look over the entries and discuss the finalists in detail. And I can say that in the 7 years that this prize has been in existence, this is the first time I heard something that I've not heard before, which was the judges were looking at the type designs presented by Peter and Corrine, and essentially said, you know, we're nitpicking details that typically we would be discussing if we were talking to a colleague about a professional typeface. And so they were so sort of overwhelmed with the just the technique on display and the creativity, and the fact that, as you'll see in just a moment, these are two very, very different designs, that they decided it wouldn't make sense to only have one prize winner this year. We really needed to have both. So it is, as I say, my pleasure to introduce them to you now. We're going to start out with Corrine and then Peter. So Corrine Ang is going to be first, discussing her typeface, which I just realized I believe is either floral or floral. I haven't asked you how that name is pronounced. And then Corrine is going to turn it over to Peter to discuss Napoleon.
Really well done. So thank you. Corrine, tell us about your typeface.
Oh, thank you so much for that super generous introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and sort of start talking about it. So yeah, as Jordan mentioned, it's called Floral. Part of the reason being I thought it was so like not extravagant per se, but very loud, kind of similar to a fluorescent color, but in typographic form. And the creation of this is really a whole long story that kind of started sometime in my mind, like a couple of years ago, sort of thinking about what it is to tell another culture's story through typography. I think we've seen a lot of history based within European lineage in terms of like how, especially Latin letter forms are kind of interpreted. But a little piece of history and context, I am from the Philippines. And the Philippines was colonized by the Spanish for about 300 years, essentially causing an erasure of the local script by Bayan, in which they were forced to utilize Latin as a form of control by the Spanish. And so letter forms became this sort of like interesting medium for me as like a place where people, my ancestors, were forced to utilize them in an oppressive way. But over time in the Philippines, as you'll sort of see from my references later, they turned into this very expressive format. And so I started thinking about the ability of the typeface to act as kind of like this reflection of memory and self in a very like personal way to me. I was sort of looking around my grandma's house and all these photos and objects that kind of lay around and patterns and textures. And it kind of resulted in this one typeface. In particular, at the time of making it, I was also looking at a lot of Filipino lettering from around the area, as you can sort of see it on the left. And kind of looking at kind of how they take the structure of the letter form and build upon it, twist it around, kind of change it to create something that's very different in texture from what would typically be utilized. Then I sort of moved further in my research and I was like, I need more references because this is so like, it's so hard to make what I envisioned in my mind. And so that's sort of where the Updike library and collection came into place. And so I reached out to Jordan and I was like, hey, like I'm working on this project and I need some help. And we looked at a lot of actually like French Art Nouveau lettering because I initially wanted to see kind of like more psychedelic things. And of course that has its roots in like Art Nouveau. I honestly lost all of the reference images that Jordan gave me because I I'm a very disorganized person. But they had a hefty amount of like effect on how I looked at the juxtaposition of the letter forms, or how the spacing and the counterforms kind of fit together. And then it was just a lot of sketching. And so it resulted in these three different styles, kind of thinking about how, as a family, like Filipino family units work in a very interesting way, where it's not typically like your direct blood related people, but we call like a bunch of like disparate people that all come together, a family, and all these loud characters kind of end up in a single room. And if you've ever had a Filipino party, it's very chaotic. And so I wanted this type family to also embody that spirit in this typeface, and that this is the result, a typeface that is based on textures. And I basically said, you know, at this point, fuck legibility, and just go with sort of like something that's a bit less perfect, a bit less readable, but that carries the spirit of my home. Yeah. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Corrine. That's fascinating. And I do have those images at some point, so I can share those with anybody who's interested. Peter, you are up.
All right. Change this to a color scheme that type designers are a little bit more comfortable with. Napoleon is a revival of an old French typeface, a royal typeface from the mid-1800s. And as a creative project, I'm still working on it, and this continues to be a story about connecting the dots. I began the project while taking Type at Cooper, which, as many of you know, is a postgraduate program, year-long program in typeface design. But in many ways, the story begins when I was a kid, when I watched my mom painting letters and numbers on ceramics and old French documents. This was one of the chapters in her creative career, and it exposed me to so many classical letter forms, but for the most part, it was Didot and Boudinot. Here's a magazine article about her work at the time, and that's my sister and I holding up a jar and a platter with our H's on them. The funny thing is that it wasn't until just a few years ago that I realized these letter forms never left me. I was reflecting on that often as I moved to New York City to take Type at Cooper. And our first project was to find an old book and revive the typeface that was used for all of the text, all of the paragraphs. So to make a text typeface. I spent days scouring antiquarian bookstores for just the right book, just the right typeface to revive. And I was just up the street from this photo, actually at the Strand bookstore's rare book room, when I found this amazing red leather and gold tome. That is Napoleon's coat of arms. And oh gosh, just look at that gold edging. It's exquisite. I've got it actually right here. It's really hefty, has these massive pages. And it turns out that this is one of a series of at least 30 volumes that catalog the letters of Napoleon I during his conquests. And it was commissioned by his grandson, Napoleon III, and printed at the Imperial Printing House in Paris. And it just has these gorgeous pages of text type, very much in the Didot style. They've got this wonderful texture to the page. I was shocked by how readable such a high contrast typeface could be. And as I looked closely, I found all of these unique or unconventional designs to various letters. I was just completely captivated by them. Just look at this lowercase l. This is called the king's mark, this serif in the middle of it. And it denotes that this was royal type, that it came from the royal printing house. They did this for about 200 to 300 years. And there are just so many other delightful characters here. You've probably spotted that G. That's unlike any G that I've seen, that I'd ever seen, and certainly that exists in any other revival. The Y has that great vertical stem, wonderful A, beautiful numbers, both lining and old style figures. I call this 2 the funky duck 2. And it's got these ornamental dividers. I made a bunch of those. So this is where I began, or should I say, so began the challenge of creating a digital revival. And it's not enough to just trace the letters. There are so many decisions to make, like when to deviate from the source material to improve spacing, or just to make the type perform better as a 21st century digital typeface. We're kind of freed from the constraints of metal type. For example, I decided to keep some of the charming softness of letterpressed type. You see the horizontal stroke there ends in a little bit of a blob. And in some cases that can help you identify the end of a thin stroke. And in other cases, it's just simply delightful. So here's a comparison of those words with version 1 of the revival. Now, of course, the focus was on text type. So the most important thing was how it performed in paragraphs. After I delivered the assignment, I knew that I wanted to continue working on it, but I was faced by this challenge that nobody recognized the typeface. None of my teachers, type historians who I spoke with, nobody knew this exact one. And I struggled to find clues about who designed it, who was the original punch cutter at the Imperial Printing House. There were so many dots I needed to connect in order to continue working on the project authentically. So eventually I reached out to Jordan at the Updike collection to help with this treasure hunt. And I sent him some samples. A couple weeks later, he found it. I was shocked. This massive book was in the Updike collection archive from the French imperial printer. It was printed in 1870, the year after my book was printed. And it includes specimens of every typeface that was being used at the time at the printer. And I found my typeface. It wasn't designed by one of the Didot family. It was designed by this punch cutter named Marcelin Legrand. And this book contains examples of 30 years of his typefaces. It gave me an appreciation for his style and the threads that run through his work, which is really important with working with somebody's original material as a revival and needing to deviate in some cases. But practically speaking, the Updike specimen, as I call it, gave me 3 things. The first is a ton of reference material for the italic, which I'll show you more of in a minute, and hundreds of pages for an extended character set to support a variety of languages. By the way, if anybody knows what this NG ligature is, please get in touch. I am so fascinated by this. I would love an excuse to include it in a digital font. The other thing that I found to be invaluable from the Updike specimen were a bunch of examples of every font size that they had. And this is vital for a high contrast typeface like this. You can see how the punch cutter changed the thin areas as the font size increases and how the proportions change for everything. So these adjustments today are typically referred to as optical sizes, and they used to just be part of the original metal type. With this material, I decided that that would be my next step, optical sizes, to adapt my current small optical size version of Napoleon, which was made for about 14 point, to a high contrast, large optical size version made for about 200 point. And that creates a scale or an axis of optical sizes so that you can have it at almost any size, and the thin strokes are always thin and crisp, but they don't totally disappear. Now, actually designing these is a challenge that I would not have been up to when I began the project. Some of these thin strokes are like 3 points. And when you see, or 3 units for type designers listening, when you look closely, you'll see that there's still a little ink blob at the end of serifs and thin strokes. And so it's trying to capture that softness and warmth of letterpress. Really tricky to do that in some of the curves like the E, but it can help your eye spot where the end of that thin stroke is. So here are a couple different optical sizes, 200 point and something around 140 point below. You can see how even as the font size decreases, the thins can remain a comfortable thinness. And you can choose from anywhere on the entire spectrum of optical sizes because it's a variable font, which for those who aren't familiar, it means you can just type your text, and if you're in a professional design software, it will expose a slider so you can adjust the optical size to what's just right and just fine tune it. But the cool thing is that variable fonts do something special with an optical size axis. Even if you're not using professional design software, anywhere that you change the font size, the optical size will adjust accordingly by default. So you could be using Pages on your computer, you could have this anywhere, and it's always going to give you the correct optical size. Here's what that looks like in practice. Say you're changing the font size. As it increases in scale, the thins become thinner. So you're always using the correct optical size. In the digital era, I actually think that this means there's never been a better time for typefaces that are really high contrast, like Napoleon. So what's next for the project? It's ongoing. I'm really excited to start diving into the italic. This is so unique. It's still got this great G and so much flavor. And the other is that I think I have found the original punches at the archives of the National Printer in Paris. And I know that I will find so many dots that have yet to be connected. So I intend to use my prize money on the plane ticket and croissants. Thank you so much to Jordan and the Updike collection, to my teachers and colleagues from Type at Cooper, and to the family and friends who have supported me along the way. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Peter. And once again, just absolutely fantastic work by both of you. Again, you can imagine the applause that everybody is offering Corrine and Peter. Thank you so much for making this a really successful Updike Prize year, and I look forward to seeing you back both, hopefully in the reading room now that we're open to the public. So I'm going to transition now. I'm going to turn it over to one of my favorite people in Rhode Island, Alice Beckwith, the president of APHA New England, and we're going to hear what I can promise is an absolutely fantastic talk. Thanks, Alice.
Okay. Hello. So when APHA New England meets, we have a little bell that we ring, a Liberty Bell, to remind us that we were founded in 1974 and that we were concerned about freedom of the press, and of course we still are. Tonight, what I'm going to do is to transition us a little bit further north in New England to Dartmouth in New Hampshire. And I thought I would do a little bit of then and now to make that transition. Then for APHA, Dartmouth always brings to mind Rocky Steinauer, who got his start in the letterpress studio there. And for the now, we have Sarah Smith, who is the program manager now of the Book Arts Workshop. But tonight we're going to be looking particularly at Dartmouth and also at the Cherokee type. Dartmouth was founded in 1769 with a charter from King George III for the education and instruction of the youth of the Indian tribes and also of English youth and others. The devotion to the education of the Indian tribes kind of fell by the wayside until 1970, when the 13th president of Dartmouth decided it was time to sort of re-up that devotion to the education of Indian youth. And he profoundly encouraged that whole college to recommit themselves. And if you go to their website today, you'll see the NAD website, Native Americans at Dartmouth. And there's a lot of really good information there. So the Native Americans are now at Dartmouth. And so it seems a very good place to have Cherokee types. Cherokee types were invented around 1828 when the first indigenous language newspaper, the Cherokee Phoenix, began publication. And they continued publication of their types, which were based on syllables as opposed to individual letters. However, in about 9 years later, their press was closed and their newspaper ended. And about a year later, the Cherokee were put on the Trail of Tears. Andrew Jackson's Indian removal policy moved the Cherokee to Oklahoma, and their presses and their types were dispersed. But in 2009, Frank Brannon of the Speakeasy Press decided that he wanted to try to revitalize the nearly lost art of Cherokee letterpress printing. And so he began to work on this, and soon Ed Rayner of the Swamp Press Letter Foundry took up the challenge and created the types that we're going to see tonight. Sarah Smith will explain how the Cherokee types were made and came to Dartmouth, and then show us around the Book Arts Workshop where she is the program manager. So Sarah, take it away.
All righty, thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you guys and show off this place a little bit and our recently purchased set of Cherokee Syllabary type. I want to say first that I'm talking to you from lands that were first tended by the Abenaki peoples. And also, I want to show you around the place here. I'm hoping that we'll have some time that I can wing the camera around so you can see some things. But I am going to show you a PowerPoint of some of the details. And I also want to just a little disclaimer here that I am not a scholar in the Cherokee language and this type, but I'm going to tell you what I know and how we've been using it, and show you some of the things that students have been doing with it. So I'm going to share my screen. I almost said scare my screen. That might be more appropriate. And how's that? Everybody see that? Okay. And I'll start here. So that's a very boring looking slide, but that's what I'm going to be talking to you about. And then just a little quick history. I know Alice just told you a little bit, but I'm going to go more into it a bit. As it was known then, graphic arts workshop started in the 1930s in this room. I put my camera here so that you could see this window, which is the same window in this photo of Ray Nash working at the hand press. And he taught here. He taught book design, printing, calligraphy, letter forms, all kinds of book things here at Dartmouth. And of course, as Alice mentioned, Rocky Steinauer was one of his students, David Godine, Alvin Eisenman. Like, the list is huge of really amazing people who learned with Ray Nash. And then in around 1970, he retired. A lot of the equipment was his, so he brought it home to his farm, and the workshop lay dormant for a while. And thankfully, they didn't do a lot with this space because in around 1989, 90, it was restarted as the Book Arts Workshop by Rocky Steinauer and a few other of Ray Nash's students like Mark Landsberg and Ed Latham. And it was still mostly just this room, but slowly as years went on, we gained the entire hallway here. So Rocky ran it. There was a lot of really important events and learning here, but it was still pretty part-time and occasional that things were open, and it wasn't really very open to curricular work or a lot of students dropping in out of curiosity. It was encouraged. One student came back to me a few years ago and said Rocky just handed him a book and a key and said, "Have at it, and see what you can do in there." So in 2013, after some classes and some faculty noticed the place and really wanted to start working here, they hired me. So I've been here almost 8 years, and just having a full-time person here to oversee the place has made it much more active. So there's another shot of this same spot right here, but with daylight, which is nice. And so you can see we have Vandercook SP15 back there in the corner. There's another room that you can't see in this photo. It's the smallest room we had that has the largest press, ironically, and that's our SP20. We have a couple hand presses and platen presses, and they all get quite a bit of use. When, of course, we work with metal and wood type, as well as polymer plates, laser cut blocks, hand carved blocks. Pretty much we'll try just about anything as long as there's no damage to presses or anything like that. But trying to teach and introduce students to this idea of one, working slower and methodically and really touching their writing in a way. So, so this you can see, this is that smaller room with the bigger press there. Can you see my cursor as I'm doing this? Yeah, good. So we also offer workshops, usually one session, occasionally a few sessions, in printing as well as bookbinding of various levels. So bookbinding was added later on around, I want to say 2011 maybe, with Eric Ahlstrom. And those workshops are usually, when it's not COVID times, open to everyone who can sign up. So it's kind of a nice combination of students and non-students. And then we have open studio times, which sometimes are this crazy busy, sometimes quieter, but students can just drop in, and non-students as well, and make whatever they want to make out of curiosity. There's always someone here to help them. So sometimes it has to do with classes, and sometimes it's just for fun. And then, of course, a real big drive here is to connect with the curricular classes. So a lot of classes will come in for a short one session visit or project, or sometimes a much longer 3-week projects. There was on the left here, you can see there was a film animation class, and they were printing on film so that they could project that. And then we have a lot of classes dealing with book history and materials. And once in a while, there's a full for credit course in here. So back to the idea of the Native American students. It is true, we do have a really great Native American program, both an academic department as well as sort of a more social program. There's the Native American house where students can live together, all Native American students. And then for me, and with our shop and our connections, I'd say it really started to expand quite a bit when I hired Ileana Godoy from Hawaii. She's Native American Hawaiian. And she started working here when she was a freshman and worked here the whole 4 years, and she was fabulous. You can see she's there on the right, helping out with another student printing. And Ileana brought in lots of friends here, and it was really great for me to have conversations with them and learn about some of their struggles trying to learn their language. You know, they would talk about how there's a language requirement in college, but it's tough to take classes in their own language. So how does that work, and how can we help with that? And then some other connections were Nick Rio, who teaches in the Native American Studies and Environmental Science, or was it Environmental Studies? I can never remember, departments. And he is Ojibwe, and he's created this group of students and staff and faculty who are of Ojibwe descent, who are trying to practice their language. So he brought in his classes, his environmental science class, in to make handmade journals here. I showed them a couple of different structures to make, and they made journals because they were going out in the field and doing work. And then he also brought in this Ojibwe group, and we did bookbinding together and worked on practicing some of the words and things for some of what they were using. And so we had gotten talking about doing a lot more projects like that. Another really exciting project was with Elaria Cruz. I didn't put her name here, that's too bad, but she was so fun to have around. She was a fellow, so she's gone now. That's one of the snags about teaching some of these classes. People are here for just a year and then they're gone. But we've stayed in touch. And while she was here, she was teaching a class in linguistics called Language Revitalization. And she is from Oaxaca, Mexico. And her family and people speak Chatino, which is, until Hilaria and her sister started, hasn't been a written language. So they're creating their writing system, which is a tonal language system. And so it has these little superscript letters to give a hint at the tones. So we did a little bit of letterpress, but then the class project mainly was creating these cloth baby books to bring back to the village in Oaxaca to help teach the little kids their language. And that has exploded. She's since published these books and spread them around, and it's really helping to teach the language. But while we were working on that project, she and I just got really excited about this idea of teaching languages, indigenous languages, but other languages as well, through making things, through using your hands, through tactile means. And we tried to think of all kinds of other ways to do this, and we decided it'd really be great to do more with this. So I'll come back to that thought later. And so whenever we need to order new type in this shop, a lot of the time we're getting type that already exists from different, type sales at the printing museum and whatnot. But sometimes we need to order brand new cast type. We usually get it from Michael Bixler, M&H type, occasionally David Wolf. He makes the Emerson type we have. I couldn't find anybody else who could. Not that he's a last resort. But and in this picture, you can see we just got some gill sands in Cyrillic, and that's really exciting. That was from Michael Bixler. So now we can do Russian, Bulgarian, Serbian, and other languages that work with Cyrillic. And it's interesting to see a class working with the type. I mean, they're literally touching their words. They're really, it's like kind of learning language through a different pathway to the brain. And then we, of course, get type from Ed Rayher at Swamp Press. And this is some math symbols, math type that we got from him. I consider that a different language as well. And sometimes we also, when we have an accumulation of broken type or odds and ends, we'll bring a bucket of lead to Ed. He's just in Western Massachusetts, just past the border from Vermont. So we just drive down there and he'll make some spacing for us. So we've been working with Ed quite a bit. And Alice mentioned Frank Brannon. So it seems like I'm jumping around, but I'm going to tell you, this all converges in one little thing. So in about 2016, it was, yeah. Frank and I both were teaching classes at PBI, Paper Book Intensive at Oxbow, Michigan. And I had met him before, but while talking to him at Oxbow, he reminded me of this project that he was doing in reviving the Cherokee Syllabary. And by this point, the type had been made. And he told me that Ed Rayher was the guy who made it. And I thought, oh, that's amazing. I could work with two people I know and like and support what they're doing and also help the students who are Cherokee and want to work with their language. Frank has done a ton of research about this, and there's some links that I'm hoping we can share with you, that some videos and different articles about some of his work, because he got a grant to have this type cast. He basically, Frank is a paper maker, book artist, printer, and wanted to use the Cherokee type. He was grew up in Western Tennessee, I think, and wanted to work with the type, but found that there wasn't any around. It had all been destroyed. And so he did a lot of research. His whole dissertation was on how Sequoia invented the type or developed it, and then how it changed over time, and then of course what happened to it as it had gotten destroyed. And then he wanted to recast it, revive it. And so a little bit more about the syllabary. It was, as Alice said, it was developed. I don't know if invented is the right word, but developed by Sequoia in the early 1820s, and it is a syllabary, so it's not an alphabet. It's in that each character is a syllable or a combination of sounds. And this chart is kind of great in that it helps English speakers learn how to use it. So say I want to find the character for the sound Li, L-I, as we would spell it phonetically. And so I'd go down the side here where the consonants are, and I go to L, and then go over to where my vowel is, L-I, and this is the character that would make that sound for me. And so this was pretty amazing. I mean, this is the only writing system that was actually adopted by its people that's invented by one person. And it just blows my mind. It seems like just such a act of genius to do this. And he was influenced by the writing that he'd seen by the European colonists and how they were able to communicate that way. And so he wanted to create something like that for his people. And it's interesting because he didn't read or write. I mean, he was monolingual. He spoke Cherokee, which hadn't been written yet. And so he was just going by what he had seen. And so it's interesting to see how those characters came about. And then Elias Boudinot, I'm not sure I'm saying that right, was a Cherokee man who was the editor of the Cherokee Phoenix newspaper, which came out later in the 1820s. And originally, the designs from Sequoia, and I don't know if any of his original drawings still exist, that's unclear to me, because the type that was eventually cast for the newspaper was cast, oddly enough, in Boston. And there had been a fire and all the drawings and plans and type were burned. So just a series of terrible events with this type. But you can see it was much more calligraphic in the beginning here. And some of these shapes you can see in the actual type that we have, but some of them look a little different. And in order to create something that was easily cast, it was interesting listening to Peter talking about the different going from letterpress to digital and how things have to be tweaked. Well, the same thing, I don't know if that's a term, technical term, tweaked. But the same thing would happen with this, that the design would have to be altered in a way to make it so it could be cast. And so this printer, Samuel Worcester from Vermont, of all places, was given the task to try to do that. And there's a really great paper, and I'm forgetting the guy's name who did it, or it's an interesting paper, Patrick Jason, I think that's how you say his name, at the University of Reading did a really interesting paper, and we'll put that link on there too. If any of you guys have questions about any of this or want to know the sources, please feel free to email me too. Anyway, he brought up the point that that Samuel Worcester was changing things quite a bit in some cases, because if you go back to that calligraphic, you go from this, which seems that Sequoia might have been looking at handwriting a script, and then this looks a lot more Roman. Now this is a proof from the type that we have, so this has been through many iterations actually, so it's even more simplified than what the newspaper would have had, but still Worcester would have done some changes to just simplify those shapes. I chose these characters to show just because I wanted you to see how similar some of them are. Like these are two different characters with two different sounds, and yet they look incredibly similar. I mean, it's tough getting this type put away in the right place because of those similarities. But for type designers, it's really incredible, I think, to see like how just some slight changes, I mean, especially this, it's just this stroke here that makes all the difference in how that can be read. And then some of these other characters, it seems like it's definitely influenced by obviously Roman letters, but maybe some Greek, and I don't know, maybe even some Arabic. I mean, that's me just projecting there, but it's just interesting to see how all these kind of other writing systems sort of slipped in there too. And then just some of these beautiful characters too. And just again, some of the subtleties, like when I printed this, I thought, oh, I over-inked it. I really messed it up. There should be a nice little space in there. But then I looked closer and it actually does touch there. So there's just funny little quirks like that. And of course, here's the type that I printed that from. It's always nice to see that brand new type. Some of it hasn't been used yet. We only got this in 2018, so. So some of the things that were tricky for me here is this is what the type case was meant to be laid out, or I think, I don't know if this is what Frank and Ed came up with, or if this is something historical. I need to ask them that, but this takes up a lot of real estate in a shop like this. And so I sort of changed it so that I could have these little dividers and put it all in one case. I mean, that works fairly well, but it gets kind of cramped. This is the 36 point. We got 18 point and 36 point. I was thinking, someone could do maybe a short poem and a title, but I'm gonna need some more of this 36 point, so I don't know how I'm gonna deal with the spacing issue there, but I guess I'll have to do what he wanted me to do and do the two cases. So, and labeling the compartments seems crucial for getting things back in the right place and finding things. Even with the chart, it's just, I think this is very helpful. And so about how the type was made, how Ed actually did this, there's a really great book, and I can hold it up too. I don't know if you can see my face in that little tiny thing. It's just a thin pamphlet, and it tells all about how he makes it. It gets quite technical, but he let me scan a few pages from it. So the thing that makes it possible for Ed to do this is that he has the some equipment that almost nobody has. So first, he makes his patterns for the pantograph machine to trace. He makes the patterns out of polymer plates because he can do that easily in his shop. So I skipped a spot, which is this type was originally a digital design. So this form of the type of the syllabary is from Xenotype. And it was somebody that Frank knew already. And so it was, and he wanted a pretty basic digital font, nothing too flourishy. And he knew he could use this royalty free because he knew the guy. And so that's why that design was chosen. So he got the negatives of the digital design and then created these polymer patterns and then used the pantograph to trace those. I showed this picture here just for anybody who doesn't know. This is what a matrix looked like. And this is a piece of type with the jet. The jet is where the hot metal would have squirted into the mold. Oops, sorry. And so usually that gets knocked off. This cross piece here is something that Ed put together so that he could, and this gets more technical than I can really do justice to, and he's totally open to email questions as well. But that cross piece helped when casting the type to keep the characters exactly in the right spot on the body of the type. Because there's so many pieces that could like easily go hanging off. I believe that's the right explanation for that. The piece of equipment that he has is the Benton Pantograph. It's a vertical pantograph. You know, usually you see like a Hamilton wood type. It's a horizontal pantograph. This one's vertical, and so and there's only, I think he said there's only 10 in the world, and there's 4 in the U.S. and he's the only one using it to actually make stuff commercially. And so the matrix that's being cut into the brass, it's a brass matrix. It's being formed up here. And this is where the pattern is, and this is the follower. So it's following the pattern and it's cutting up here. So he could really create molds for anything, as long as he can have a digital image that he can then make that polymer pattern out of. So he has made things of imaginary languages that people have made up. He could do all kinds of things. So get thinking about what you want your type to be next. I have no idea what he charges for that, but so then he cast the type using those matrices on a Thompson caster. And so there's a picture of the Thompson, and then here is the mold. So this is where the matrix goes. The lead or metal gets squirt in here, and so this is where that jet is formed. And this is where it, closes up and creates your piece of type, and it slides out here. So it's casting one piece at a time. That's why it takes a while to get it. And so this is the package of type that we got in the mail. It was so exciting. The guys in the mail room were like, "What is this?" I was like, "Oh, sorry, it's a box of lead." But this was just amazing to open this up and see all this beautiful type. In particular, I'm like fond of this area right here. And what that's let us do is just open up all these doors and get all these different voices in here. And that's been my goal. One of my goals here is, because I'm in this Ivy League institution, I feel like it's our responsibility, or at least a good thing to do, is to get as many voices in here and not just the usual suspects, and try to get different languages. We have Hebrew and Greek and accents for Spanish and French, but this was just a real amazing thing to bring to the collection. So I was able to bring in this class that happens every winter, Colin Calloway's Native American Studies class. It's called Pen and Ink Witchcraft, and it's about the treaties that were formed between the Native Americans and the European colonists. And so he wanted them to really see what that type would look like and how it's done. So I set before the class came in, they didn't set this type. I put this together, and this is Cherokee artist Jeff Marley's bit of poetry, and it translates to "Your words are not fleeting." So I created this little postcard for them to print and showed them how to ink it up on the hand press. They look kind of scared back there, but and then each of them got to print one. And so it was kind of an exciting thing, I think, for some of them. And then we've had students come in, especially when they come in as a tour, when they're freshmen or they first get to the school and they find out we have this. I've seen some faces really light up, and some of those students have come in to make these projects. This was from a printmaking class this year, and he layered wood type and the Cherokee Syllabary here, and there's a comment on the children's bodies they've been finding in Canada, where they're supposed to be in a school. And then this was from a class actually just ended just a few weeks ago. The history of the book happens every fall here, and students have a choice between writing a paper or making a book as their final, which seems like a no-brainer to me. But and so this student, she is from Oklahoma, and she wanted to make a book that was commenting on and comparing the English language and letters and the Cherokee. And so she made this do-si-do book. I don't know if you're unfamiliar with it. It's basically a 2-section pamphlet where they sort of are opposite sides. I have it here. I'll bring it out at the end here. And so you see the Cherokee side is all beautiful, and she wanted it to kind of look like a landscape, and going from, it kind of went from a coastline to grass, so as just commenting on how they went from the East Coast to the West. And then also just trying to make it interesting and beautiful. And then the English side is, in her words, boring, and she wanted it to be kind of like a computer where, words get cut off and it's just 3 dots up a pause, so really kind of making a comment on kind of about how Cherokee kids were being forced to learn and assimilate into the English language. And then I mentioned Elaria Cruz and the cloth baby books, and how excited we got about the idea of teaching language, especially indigenous languages, through making things. So I foolishly signed on to organize this symposium about it, only foolishly because I'm not much of an event planner, but it ended up being really terrific. We had Ed Rayher, you can see here on the right there, and Candace Teehee from Oklahoma, and then a bunch of other panelists talking about the work that they do in either working with these languages or in teaching and working through art and things like that. Ed talked about how he made the type, and Candace talked about a lot of different artists she knows, and she also taught everybody in the crowd some Cherokee words. It was really terrific. So we were able to do events like that. This is a print, or actually 2 prints that are meant to be hung next to each other. And so we have the Cherokee Community Values, as written by Benny Smith, which was one of their elders who had just passed away. And so we have it in a phonetic Cherokee, and then we have it in translated English, and over here is in the Cherokee syllabary. So, and it's really amazing to see them together, like just how much shorter it is, for one thing, having each character be a syllable. It makes it a shorter, a smaller block of text, which is kind of interesting. But to me, what's interesting is the color you get from a block of this text. You just get this wonderful, I don't know, it's not a gray really, it's just a wonderful like typographic color there. And for me also working with this, because I was the one who set the type, I felt like I was learning as I was starting to set all this type and recognizing characters that keep repeating. And lastly, this also enabled us to create this program insert for a performance that was here at the Hopkins Art Center for Delana Studi, who was doing a performance about the Trail of Tears. So we were able to have some of that text from the program in Cherokee to go along with what she was talking about. So that, I'm going to stop my screen share. That's the story. And then I just want to show you that book that student did, just because it was a little hard to see in the photographs. And you can see how the pages turn here. Lighting is a little tricky. They brought in much brighter lights in here, so it's kind of tough to do this, but you get the idea, I think. And then here's the English side, which you won't be able to see any of the writing there because it's completely, oh yeah, well, a little bit, but you get the idea. Do we have time for me to do a little wing around with the camera or no?
Sure. Yes, Sarah.
All right, let's do it. So I'm going to pick up my camera. I just want to show you around a little. I can't go down the whole hallway because I'll lose you. But so this is the workshop, and it's changed, of course, a little bit since the 30s, but not a ton. All right, so it's a little bit. And then I always joke around how this is, maybe I'll do this one. This is the tallest letterpress shop I've been in because we've got these kind of nice cases like this, and it smells really good too. This is where our Emerson is, and I need to move it because everybody wants to work with it, and we have to like, either you're taking out a case from up here, which seems insane, or we get on a ladder and use it up there. But so I need to move it around and put the stuff we don't want to use as much up there. But and then we do use all these tabletop platen presses like this one here. We just had a holiday coaster printing event where we used all the tabletop presses. And then we also have the one in the back here that's not tabletop. We have a Pearl that gets used a lot. And it's interesting to see just how much these get used. And a lot of people like the Albion here, the hand press, because it's not as scary as using motors and things. Pretty much everybody who comes in is very much a beginner. And so it's like, one, they're really enthusiastic, so that's great, but also they don't know a lot. So I don't want to have too many super sophisticated things around. And then let's see if this will work. Keep going. That's a nice one. Oh, I'm going to start pulling on the cord soon. More tall type. This one we got just as I got here, 2013. In fact, it was given to us by Joanna Rudge Long, and her father was like best friends with Ray Natch. So it's like kind of nice to have things come back home. And actually that Emerson type we have, and the larger, I don't think I can get the camera in here, this other little room has the SP20 in there. Those are from Joseph Blumenthal. So, and he designed the Emerson typeface. So there's some pretty amazing things here. And then of course, keep going. There's more, all the organizational stuff. Fortunately, there's Ray Natch there. And I always wonder what he thinks of what I'm doing here, but you may not be able to hear me anymore, I just realized.
You're good, we can hear you.
Oh, good. Anyway, so that's the room here. You know, I say if you have to be in a basement, this is a pretty good basement to be in, right? So that's what I've got. Any questions?
We have, Sarah, that was amazing. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Completely fascinating, and I can't wait to follow up on the many links that you provided. We have a question. Do you know if Ed has made any attempt to provide his knowledge of typecasting of the Cherokee Syllabary to any of the 3 Cherokee bands?
I don't know. I would be guessing, and that probably wouldn't be the right thing to do. I feel like he would have. He's very enthusiastic about it, but I don't know for sure.
Lots of comment on how beautiful the studio is, and also how great that people are able to, the students are actually able to work and make things and really be involved. Other questions?
Sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just asking any other questions for people to put them in.
It is a remarkable shop in that it's not part of, you know, the art department or, sorry, another department that might be requiring you to be in a class. That's one of the things that I love about being in the library here, is that we get classes from and students from all kinds of disciplines. I mean, I'm teaching environmental science students how to make a waterproof journal that they can bring out to the field, computer science classes, but then also, of course, the English classes and art classes, you know, so it's a huge range, and that just wouldn't happen if I were just in an art department, I think, alone. And also, I don't have to, and this is just for me personally about my job, I don't have to deal with a lot of the departmental craziness, so I'm just here in the basement of the library and doing my thing, and it's pretty awesome. But also just that they can come in out of curiosity, you know, it's not such a closed shop. And I have people who think that's maybe a little bit reckless, but, you know, somebody's always here to keep an eye on people. And to me, it's important to introduce people who didn't even know this was a thing, that it is a thing, and that maybe it's something they want to keep learning about. And, you know, otherwise they might not know about it, so.
That's so exciting. That I was actually curious. I was going to ask you about who is it that actually gets to use the workshop. Like, is it limited to students that are pursuing a certain thing? But no.
No. I mean, you know, so you get some goofy, you know, stuff being made sometimes, you know, just a thank you note or something like that. But that's great. I mean, that's still, you know, getting that experience. And I've had students come visit later and say that, okay, I took that class back in 2011, I liked it, but you know, whatever. But then when they were in a job doing something, they got bored and they took another letterpress class, and then they got the bug and opened up their own shop, actually. So you never know, you know, just planting those seeds, how that works out.
Someone is asking for a history of the book. How many students choose to write papers instead of make books? And what are some other projects/papers that people have created? And then another question, do students work on longer independent projects with you? Those are related.
Yes, all of that, yes. No, the history of the book class, it ranges quite a bit. There's been years where 14 out of 16 people made a book, and that gets a little hairy in here because I'm helping them do it. And they're all wildly different. I mean, there's no parameters. It's just, it has to have something that we can all agree is a page and a cover. But, you know, so you get like, you get mobiles, you get all kinds of, like, one of them was a lamp, you know, I don't know. And it's up to me to help them with that, but that's really fun. This last time we only had 4. I think we scared them away a little bit, but because some of them, I think, choose to make the book thinking it's going to be easier, and it's actually a lot harder than they realize. And also, I mean, these guys all know how to write a paper in their sleep. And so that, but I think they want to do something different. I mean, and especially this year, we're finding people really want to do things with their hands and do something different and not be in front of a screen. So there was another part of that question too.
Let's work on longer independent projects with you.
Definitely. We've had a few that went on for quite a while, full books. And some that were started and not finished, of course, but yeah, they can do longer projects. And we do have a letterpress intensive that's taught by Juan Chung, and he's been wanting to do much bigger projects with a group of students. It would almost feel like a club for them, and I think that would be really great if they could make a book. It's just tough for them to commit to things like that sometimes, but it'd be a really great thing to do. Yeah.
That idea of the tactility in the moment when it's been so hard to have any actual contact with anything, that makes so much sense. Was the workshop open? Like, how long did you have to close for last year?
So we were closed until fall of 2020. We were kind of open. So the way it worked was I couldn't have classes in, so I was doing everything through Zoom, but individual students could come in. So it could only be me and one other person in a room at a time. And so sometimes I might have them in other rooms, like we have a bookbinding room. Sometimes I'd have them in the hallways. We would make it work one way or another, and I'd run back and forth. But there was definitely a lot of Zooming and sending materials out. It worked better for bookbinding than letterpress. I mean, I can only demonstrate really, and sometimes I was setting type and printing for them based on what they wanted, but that was still me doing it, not them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it stayed much busier than I would have thought, though.
Other questions people have? Or comments? I know there was activity about some of the links that you sent.
And please feel free to ask questions of Peter Nowell. Corrine had to leave, but if you have any questions about the font journeys of the Updike Prize winners, please feel free to put those in the chat.
Those really were amazing designs from both of you guys. And it was great the way you talked about them, I have to say. And Peter, it really did set me up for talking about the Cherokee and how it had to be adjusted from the drawing to the type. And then also when, not to keep taking over the conversation, sorry, but when Ed had to then take the digital type and tweak it kind of in reverse to make it fit for the casting, because some of the pieces of the letter form would have run into the next on the caster. So it's kind of interesting that it always has to be done.
Right, it's like every time that type exists in a different medium, it needs to be reinvented just to kind of feel the same, which can be completely unexpected and counterintuitive.
Yeah.
I would imagine that, I was looking in the chat, it sounds like Apple might have been involved in helping to create a digital, maybe one of the first digital fonts for Cherokee. And I can only imagine that that was true, that was just as true when they were making it work with pixels.
Right, that's true. Yeah, because there's all those little funny little, well, like you were saying about at the end of some of those strokes, the little ink blob, there's all these odd little spots that you'd have to try to capture.
The tie has those little loops. And
yeah.
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 Anyone else? Alice, any summing up remarks you would like to make? For Jordan?
Well, I just think it's a totally fabulous evening for type nuts, which we all are. And I just, it's marvelous the way that the early part segued into the second part. We didn't really know that was going to happen, but it was fabulous, really fabulous.
Well, I have to say that PPL being able to do these, this is our second collaborative program with APHA that Alice has brought to us. And as someone who knew nothing about type, I'm becoming very, it's very, very interesting. And it's amazing to be in a room full of people with all these really incredible questions and things to look at and think about that non-type nerds don't really notice. So thank
Yeah.
you all.
And go to our website where you can see much
Yes.
more.
Oh, I see a
And
question.
we all-
Ooh,
yep.
Northern California just invited us to a talk that's coming up on Zoom. If we can get-
Cool. Oh, yeah. That'd be great with Ben.
yeah.
St. Peter, we have one last question before we finish up. Jacob Poindexter asks, great work on Napoleon, not a question, but the question is, did you have any end uses and applications in mind? And will it be available for purchase sometime in the future? I am also interested in this question, Jacob. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. It will be available at some point in the future because I would say it is first and foremost a text face, and you can't really put out a text face until it's got bold, italic, in this case, different optical sizes. It kind of has to be a family in order to be really, in order to be a workhorse. So it's going to take some time, but I'm excitedly working on it. It's funny, I mentioned that my mom was painting the letters on ceramics and documents. This blows my mind, but she uses Didot as her font in Mail on her Mac, and it's like that's the Heffler and Co. font that is preloaded on every Mac, and it's for a far higher larger optical size. So when she's reading like small emails, like those thins are basically completely invisible. And I just have to say, like, I want there to be a great Didot style option for screens. And that's one of the things about variable fonts that makes me so excited is that the optical size could be set automatically. And I intend to, optical sizing is its own fascinating area, and it's not that there is an inherent way that 200-point optical size looks or that 14-point looks. It's going to be different based on, like we were saying, the medium. So if you're on a very coarse, older screen, you might need to use an optical size of 7 in order to show it at 12 or 14 points, just so that the thins can still appear with a very coarse pixel grid. There's of course, there are printing methods that are very coarse and ones that are incredibly precise. So I plan to set the values for the optical size axis according to how they will look best on screens. I just think that is, it's unconventional, and I think that it's really overdue. I would love long-term to see my mom able to use a version of a Didot that is not hard on her eyes. And I know that although it's a funny story, that's an extreme example. And I know that if it can be performant there, it can be performant in many other places. And then I think the last thing I'd say is just that there are many Didots out there, right? Why does there need to be another? And I think that the technical side of this with the variable fonts and the optical sizes, I think that's part of it. But what's also interesting is that this is a punch cutter that we haven't heard from. And he has these beautiful letter forms that are quite different from any of the Didot family. If I had even longer, and I know I went over time, but if I had longer, I might show some comparisons with Didot letters and Marcelin's letters, and they're very resolved, and I feel like they feel very contemporary. So I absolutely think that there's a place in the font market for this, especially with the current technology. So I can't wait to get it out.
Excuse me. Thank you so much, Peter, and thanks to everybody. Thank you, Sarah, Alice, of course. We can't wait till you send us your next suggestion for a joint program. Thanks to everyone for coming. Thank you, Corrine, even though she's not here anymore. We will be sending, as Janaea said, an evaluation very short tomorrow, and we hope that you will give us some feedback. And thank you again for joining us this evening. Have a wonderful rest of your night and wonderful holidays. Thanks.